Mark will be available to sign books following the presentation, and he will stay until every book is signed. He doesn't have to leave till 10 tomorrow morning. There's signing details in your program. We all wish this chapter in our history had never been written. But Gabby and Mark's book is a reminder that out of the worst tragedy comes courage and hope for the victims and the community. Now a message from Gabby Giffords.
Hello, this is Gabby Giffords. I miss you. I miss Tucson. The mountains, blue skies, even the heat. I'm getting stronger. I'm getting better. It's been a hard year for all of us. Thinking about that day makes me sad. 6 people died. 6 innocent people. So many people hurt. There is lots to say. I will speak better. I want to get back to work. Representing Arizona is my honor. My staff is there to help you. They keep me informed on your behalf. I miss you. I miss home. I'll see you real soon. Thank you.
We're very excited that Mark chose to come to Tucson to discuss this very personal memoir. Please give a warm welcome for Navy Captain Mark Kelly and NPR's Ted Robbins.
This stage in front of this kind of group of people sitting down before. It feels a little strange. Yeah, I'm looking for people I know. I heard there's some kid in a spacesuit here.
Okay, back down a little bit. It is my great pleasure and honor to be here and be your
surrogates to ask Mark. It's on. It's either too loud or really hot. This is supposed to be mine. Try that. How's that? Are we on? So we're going to chat for about an hour, and then we have some questions that you all have submitted that we're going to take about 15 minutes to answer, or Mark is anyway. And then, as you heard, he will stay till the wee hours signing what is a pretty extraordinary book. So the first question is, that message was recorded a month ago or so?
Yeah, about a month.
What's the latest? What progress has been since?
Well, you know, Gabby works really, really hard every single day. You know, she spends a good hour or so in physical therapy, an hour in occupational couple hours in speech, you know, probably a total of 5 hours a day. And she continues to improve, you know, right at the beginning. Obviously, when you start out in the ICU, you see drastic improvements, you know, from day to day or even hour to hour sometimes. But we still see that, not hour to hour anymore, and not really day to day, but certainly week to week. So she continues to get better, which is really a great thing.
I suspect almost everybody here certainly knows what happened in January, but if you want to just very briefly describe what you're dealing with, what the wound is, and what the deficiencies are.
So Gabby had one of those types of injuries, a brain injury from a bullet that, you know, in modern history, they're much worse today than they were, let's say, during World War II. It's because of the velocity of the projectile, the velocity of the bullet. So during World War II, you used to have actually more people would survive being shot in the head. And now, not so much. And only about 5% of the people that are shot the way she was live. And then most of those are permanently, you know, disabled and have a very hard time recovering. So she is in the very, very small percentile that are first lucky enough to survive, and then, you know, that'll really, really fight hard to recover. The injury was on the left side of her head, so it largely affects the right side of her body, her right leg and her right arm. And her right leg is coming along, but no matter how hard she tries to will her right arm to work, it doesn't cooperate. She pats it every so often, tries to get it going. She'll point her finger at it, and it doesn't want to move, but she's hopeful and she's working at it. But the big thing for her is just regaining her ability to speak fluently, and that has come a really long way over the last 10 or 11 months. So it's really, really amazing to see. I mean, that's the one thing that we watch, this incredible progression, even now week to week.
And her stamina?
Her stamina is really good. You know, in the beginning, anybody with a traumatic brain injury needs to sleep a lot. And she did that at first, but now not so much. I mean, she's getting back to her old self. You know, somebody who can pop up in the morning, though sometimes it's a little hard getting her out of bed, especially if it's cold. But she gets up and she's ready to attack the day, and she doesn't need a nap anymore during the day, and then, you know, goes to sleep at night and gets up and does it all over again.
Let's talk a little bit about the book, since that's the ostensible reason we're here, and everybody has at least seen the cover, and it is a Tucson Festival of Books. It's pretty extraordinary in how candid it is. Tell us why you decided to write a book in the first place.
So Gabby and I talked about it in the beginning. You know, all this stuff was happening to her, to a little bit, you know, to the both of us. And, you know, I don't have a very good memory. So I figured, you know, if we don't put it down on paper, we're going to forget. Trying to tell this story sometime later, it's going to be much harder. And, you know, I've got the personality of, you know, I always want to do the next thing, and if we're going to do it at all, let's get it done right now. So we thought it was, you know, we got a lot of questions about the story that mostly I was telling over and over again because she was spending a lot of time on her recovery. But it seemed like the right thing to do, to try to capture, you know, that moment in time when it's fresh in both of our memories and put it down on paper, thinking people would be interested in reading it. When we decided to do that, I talked to Gabby a lot about it. You know, especially for somebody who's a political figure like Gabby is, you know, there's a little bit of risk throwing everything down in the book. But, you know, I pointed out to her and we discussed it. I said, you know, people are going to spend, I don't know how much that thing costs, $26.99 without the discount. I mean, that's a lot of money. That, you know, you got to put everything in there, and just, so we did. We didn't leave any detail of this process or our relationship out.
There is, by the way, an enormous table of books at Costco. So, I mean, nobody here is going to buy it. You can buy it out there, but it's all over. So for those of you who will read the book, you'll notice that the structure it jumps back and forth in time between your childhood, Gabby's childhood, your meeting and blossoming relationship, the shooting, and recovery. And why did you decide to structure it that way? And if you could just tell us a little bit about the process of writing it.
So, you know, I would have assumed that if you write a book like this, you would start at the beginning chronologically and write it to the end. But we had a collaborator, Jeff Zaslow, who was also the collaborator with Randy Pausch on a book that many of you probably heard of called The Last Lecture. And he's a very smart guy. This is a guy that when Ann Landers, there was a competition to replace Ann Landers, and he won it. So he was Ann Landers for a couple of years, or Dear Abby was one of the sisters. So he's a very sensitive guy, but he's also very smart. And right from the beginning I said, so Jeff, where do you, and this is where it helps having a collaborator, somebody can put all this information together. And I said, where do you think we should start this thing? I think we should start on January 8th. And he was like, no, we don't start there. I go, well, where do we start? And he says, I have no idea, but it's not that day. And he says, I'll tell you when we get there. And I spent a lot of time on the phone with him. As I drove between downtown Houston, where Gabby was going through rehab, and where I was working at the Johnson Space Center, it's about a 40-minute drive each way. I would spend that entire drive in the morning and in the evening on the phone with Jeff for months. And after we had our first launch scrub and we were back in Houston, and I told him the story of being on the beach with Gabby, I got to the end of that conversation with him and he said, that's chapter 1. And then I said, well, why is that chapter 1? And then he told me, and I go, yeah, I think you're right.
And there's a lovely picture of that too.
Yes, and we got a nice picture of that in the book too.
So the process was how involved were you? How involved was Gabby?
Yeah, so I would spend hours and hours on the phone with Jeff and give him every detail of our lives. And then he would talk to other folks, friends here in Tucson, Brad Holland, who might be here, Raul Erickson, who I think's here, Gabby's parents, staff members, Rod, and Ron Barber, who are both in the audience today. He'd spend a lot of time talking to them and talking to me. And then he would put something down on paper and he would send it to me. And then I would read it, rewrite it, add stuff, take stuff out, work on it for a good period of time. Write new stuff that was just missing, send it back to him. Then we would have a debate, and he'd say, sometimes he would have to try to talk me into, approaching it the way he did. And he was generally successful. Sometimes I was successful. And then when it was a pretty good chapter, then I would take it to Gabby, and we would talk about it. And she would read it. I would read parts to her. We'd go over it in detail. She would tell me things that were missing, which early on was a hard thing for her to do. She could make it very clear that there's something left out or there's something wrong. And in the process, it was good to see. It got easier for her over time. And then she would spend time on the phone with him, usually with me on speakerphone on the weekends. And it would kind of go like that for 24 chapters, just back and forth. And we can attribute a lot of the good stuff in here that, especially a lot of the parts about Gabby that I didn't know about, because she had to let me know, well, you can't forget this.
Speaking of which, there are a lot of personal things in there.
Yes.
Did you have any trouble deciding what to put in and what to leave out?
No, I just said, we'll put everything in there. No, we didn't leave anything out. So, like I said, books are expensive.
And was there anything that you, not that I'm expecting you to tell us, but was there anything that you decided not to put in?
No, everything I gave to Jeff. And sometimes he would say, "Are you sure you want to put this in here?" And I'm like, you know, why not? We'll take our lumps later.
Well, let's go into what's in the book then. A number of people I would guess are more familiar with Gabby's background than yours, because she is a child of Tucson. She grew up here, went into the family business, state legislature, Congress. You sort of described in the book growing up on the mean streets in New Jersey. How did that shape you?
Well, both my parents were police officers. But anybody ever see The Sopranos? I grew up in that neighborhood. You know, that Bloomfield Avenue? I grew up about 2 miles from there, where that pork store is. And, you know, a lot of the kids I went to school with, their parents were in the mob, and my parents were cops. And my dad put some of my friends' parents in jail. But it was you know, I thought I lived in the suburbs at the time, but I didn't. And, you know, but I went to a good public high school, and, you know, did relatively well in school later on, not in the beginning. You know, I think I was fortunate, you know, if it wasn't for my dad being a supervisor, you know, a captain at the police department, I probably would have been in juvie a couple times.
At least it was good that you thought you were in the suburbs.
Yes.
Probably gave you a better mindset.
Yeah.
You also grew up with a twin, Scott, and the both of you became astronauts. The only twins in...
Yeah, we're the only relatives, actually.
Is that right? How in the world did you guys end up as astronauts?
I have no idea. You know, we used to make pizzas together, and I thought that's all we'd ever do. We were both Navy test pilots. That's kind of how we got.
Was that a dare? Did you say, I'm going into the Navy? And
You know, no, I actually went in the Navy a year before my brother did. And then he was going to be a doctor, a medical doctor. And I talked to him about showing him airplanes, and I was going to fly off this aircraft carrier. He says, "Wow, that sounds a lot more fun than being a doctor." I decided to do the same thing.
so you just followed?
Yeah, he's been following me the whole, you know. I'm 6 minutes older, he followed me out on day one.
He made it into space Force, right?
He did. He was actually the first. We had a very large class of astronauts, the one my brother and I were in, with 35 Americans in our class, and he was the first American in our class to fly.
Anything else about your background you care to divulge?
Nope. That's all it's in there.
Yeah, it is. It's true. So how did your paths cross with Gabby? And especially, I'd like you to tell us about your first date in prison.
Yes.
That was your first date, period, in prison.
I think most marriages sometimes turn out to being in prison. In our case, it started in prison. Yeah, Gabby and I knew each other from this thing called the Young Leaders Forum, which was a group of young professionals, you know, under the age of 40, went on a trip to China together. I met her there. A year later, we had the Chinese would come to the United States, and did you guys know that she really loves Tucson? You heard her say this? So she loved it so much that she had all these Chinese folks come to Tucson. And we took them out, did this cattle rustling and this cattle drive. But anyway, at the conclusion of that, she, you know, told me about this trip she was going to take to the foreign state prison. And that she'd asked, you know, friends to go with her, and nobody wanted to go to the prison. I'm like, how could people not want to go to prison? So I raised my hand, I'll go. You know, and we visited the prison, toured it with the warden, went in a murderer's cell, sat in a gas chamber. But she wouldn't do that, but I did. That was our first date.
That was your first date? Did that set the tone for things?
You might think it did, but actually it didn't. Well, I guess it set the tone for adventure. You know, she's a very adventurous person that likes to do interesting things, and that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. When did you know?
You know, I knew a little bit then, but we had a long distance relationship, so it wasn't when we saw each other every day in the beginning, or ever until January 8th.
Well, speaking of which, good segue. So, you put a toast from your wedding in 2007 from Robert Reich, former Secretary of Labor under President Clinton. He toasted you to a bride who moves at the velocity that exceeds that of anyone else in Washington, and to a groom who moves at a velocity that exceeds 17,000 miles per hour. I'm just curious, your honeymoon was postponed because she was in Baghdad and then went to the marriage, and have you taken a honeymoon?
No, not yet. So I've got to fit that in at some point.
So the other thing about that quote that strikes me is that you've gone from a gazillion miles an hour to a stop, and now a halting steps forward. And plus you've retired from the Navy, as well as Gabby being disabled. And you mentioned in the book that you do a lot of thinking now, comparing Gabby now with how she was before the shooting, how she used to be the great encourager, and I think anybody who's around knows that. And now it's you and others who are doing the encouraging. And I wondered if you would reflect on that for a moment and how you made the adjustment, or continue it.
Yeah, she was not only the big encourager, she was the big talker. Handling, when you're born with that name, I think people expect it. She certainly was always a big talker, and she'll get back there. But it's a gradual process. Even today, just because of the situation we're in, I do probably 80% of the talking in our conversation. But that's improving all the time. And it's she still does her encouragement, with me. She hasn't really changed all that much, except with the difficulty she has with communicating. But she's still the same person, exactly the same personality. When we first got her to the rehab hospital in Houston, her neurosurgeon, a guy by the name of Dr. Don Kim, first thing he said to me, he said, I'd met this guy 30 seconds before, and he goes, normally people think it's better to get shot in the right side of their head because your speech is then largely intact. He says, he doesn't agree with that. He says, because he sees a lot of people, that have been shot in the right side of their head. And they can speak normally, and to the average person on the street, they seem very normal, but to their relatives, they seem like different people. Because your personality, most of the things that make up your personality is on that side of your brain. So, he said he's thankful that, Gabby was shot on your left side. He said, we got some work to do, but we'll get there. But the thing to be thankful for is that she'll be the same person.
So you would rate comprehension at what?
As far as I can tell, it's 100%. It might not be. It might be 98%. But cognitively, comprehension, and her personality, and all those things that make up a person with like who they are. That's all still there. just the communication that she struggles with.
Well, the medical term is aphasia.
Aphasia.
But that is such a wide...
It is. There's different subgroups, and there are. It's really very interesting. There are people with traumatic brain injuries that can understand completely, but have a hard time speaking, like Gabby. But there are also people that can speak 100% fluidly, but can't understand anything, which is equally debilitating. There are people that can read well, but can't write well, or can't write at all. But there's also folks that can write something out, and when they're done writing it, they can't read it. So, the brain is a very, very interesting organ. And unlike a stroke, a traumatic brain injury is, they vary much more from injury to injury, and it's very difficult to predict, how people are going to progress. And that's why in the beginning, after Gabby was injured, we really didn't know what to expect. But I did know one thing. I knew if anybody could pull themselves through this horrible experience, if there was anybody that I knew that was strong enough to get through this, it was her.
So here's a question that has come from many people, which is that obviously your private life has radically changed. In the book, I think you allude to the fact that you guys spent 1 and 3 days together for most of your, or 100 out of 360 days a year. Let's just say intermittent, because you were both on a fast track of sorts. Since January 8th, you've pretty much gone 24/7 with some breaks. Like to say, go into space. How has that been? Has anything prepared you did anything prepare you for your role as caregiver? And that's the first part.
I think that's probably the first time I've got that question. As the commander of the space shuttle, you're kind of the caregiver for your crew members. Making sure they have everything they need to do their job. And I think I took that approach a little bit. My approach to this was to make sure Gabby had everything she needed to do her job, and her job was to get better. So I think I had some prior skills. Certainly no background in handling a medical situation like that, but certainly the background to handle a lot of complex decisions that need to be made, and some planning and organizing. So I think I was somewhat maybe ready to do that. But yeah, our lives are a lot different now. I make her breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day, which I love doing. And it's great to be. When she gets out of the car on her way back to my house after rehab, I'm there to get her out of the car and put her in the car in the morning, and I'm there when she's in speech therapy in the afternoon, and it's just great to see the progress. And she's got this very positive attitude about it. She's one of those most positive people I've ever met, and that certainly hasn't changed. She's continuing to work very, very hard.
She, in fact, in the book, you say she left after she made that rather dramatic trip to Congress to make the vote in August. She declined to meet with the president in order to get back to her rehab. Is that?
Yes. So she went up there on August 1st to vote, and then the president wanted to see us. It was actually planned. I was up there with my space shuttle crew, that week, and we were going in to see President Obama, and he really wanted to see Gabby. Vice President saw her because he's vice president. He can go over, without a lot of notice, and he went over to the house because he knew she was going to be there to vote. And the president wanted to see her, and I had to tell him, nope. decided to go home. And, you know, she just did not, you know, that one day of therapy is very important to her. So she doesn't, you know, it's hard to get her to miss anything.
So, getting back a little bit, you talked about caregiving, but how has it changed your view toward marriage and commitment?
Well, you know, I wrote the person who married us, Stephanie Aaron, Rabbi Aaron's here, and I'm trying to remember what the ketubah is the Jewish marriage vows, and I wrote those for us. And I didn't want to do the whole sickness and health thing, you know, because that's kind of like the standard. So I wrote something I thought was a little bit more creative. I had something, I guess, in there to that effect. But, you know, I think that's what you sign up for, you know? You know, it's, you know, when somebody you love winds up in this situation, I mean, you've got to be the person that is their, you know, their advocate, and, you know, the person that's going to be there for them 100%. And, you know, that's what I signed up to do, and it's been an interesting year. It's had some really incredible lows, but some really good highs too. And, you know, I think we both learned a lot from it.
Did you get a little more prosaic? Have you? I know that at some point you put a ramp in the house. Have you retrofitted the house?
No, we put a ramp in the house for about 6 hours. And Gabby then decided she wasn't going to use the wheelchair and got rid of it. And then I handed her a cane, and then she took the cane immediately and walked to the garage and threw it in the garage. One-story house, looked around pretty well.
So broadening that out, how have your views changed toward healthcare in this country? She had voted for the administration's healthcare reform bill. It took a lot of heat back in the district for it. And I'm just curious as to whether this has, and we know, as a member of Congress who was on duty, she is getting healthcare paid for by the government. How have either of your views changed or stayed the same?
You know, one thing I learned is, you know, there's a lot of areas within healthcare that we, you know, as a community, as a nation, have made some pretty poor choices and things that could be done much better. As an example, you know, there are healthcare plans that probably many of you have, you probably don't know this, but where if you're injured, like with a brain injury, like a stroke, or you get in a car accident, you get a limited amount of rehab. Maybe speech therapy, but it's a limited amount. As an example, there was a patient that was doing some co-treatment, like a, a class with more than one person in it, that had been going to Gabby's rehab hospital for 1 month every year for the previous 10 years, because that's all her health plan would cover. Now, according to her doctors, the rehab doctor, the neurosurgeon, you know, he told me that if we could have given her 5 months in a row, right in the beginning, she'd probably never have to come again. But she'll come a month for probably another 10 years, because she can't get, you know, far enough, and the month just kind of gets her started, and then without the therapy for 11 months, she kind of regresses, she's back where she started. So, I mean, that would certainly be an easy thing, you know, to fix with legislation, would be to, you know, where, you you be a little bit more proactive up front, and don't worry so much about the long term, and think long term. Because in this case, in that one specific case where they say that happens a lot, you know, the long term cost is going to be much higher for that one patient.
Now, do you anticipate either yourself or Gabby taking a more proactive role in
Well, because
advocating?
yes, because you know, because of Gabby's experience and my experience with this and her staff's experience in what Gabby's going through, it's not, you know, will we take a more proactive role? Her office has already taken a more proactive role in dealing with some of these issues with regards to rehab of patients that have suffered brain injuries.
Now, you have, well, your wife chose to be a public figure. She chose to be in politics. You've sort of been forced to become a public figure. Certainly you were, but you're forced to become a much, much more public figure than you were before. On TV, being here, at prayer breakfast. Why did you decide to do that? And how are you handling it? Or was it
Why did I
even-
decide?
Yeah.
I didn't decide to do that. It's kind of happened. Yeah, I mean, I certainly decided the public figure aspect of being an astronaut. You know, that has a little bit of a, you know, there's a public expectation, and you know, meet with the public, and but then, you know, marrying Gabby raised the bar a little bit on that, and what happened in January, you know, just kind of, you know, stuck me in that role a little bit. So I just try to do the best job I can.
So you're just going.
Try not to mess it up.
Join the club. Yeah, I remember your last public appearance here, which was when the president was here, far from the McHale Center, and you were exhausted. I mean, you looked exhausted, and I'm just going back a little bit. What do you remember?
I remember that Michelle Obama is very tall. I hadn't slept much by the time that. I actually just started, I think the night before I got a good night's sleep. The first 3 days, I don't think well, I know the first 2 nights I didn't sleep at all. You know, the night of January 8th and January 9th. And then at one point I said to myself that, is this still working?
It's in your lab.
Fell off. So then I said to myself, you know, they're asking me all these questions, and I'm making all these decisions in regards to Gabby's care. I got extra sleep. So then I made a point that, you know, for 6 hours every night, I got a room up there with the babies in the ICU, the neonatal care unit. Fortunately, I didn't have to sleep in one of those little incubators. They brought a bed in for me, and I'd go up there at night, check on the little kids.
I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. To one of the audience questions. Is there anything that you would have done, looking back now, anything you'd do differently in terms of medical care?
You know, that's a tough one. I don't think so. And I don't think it's necessarily because, you know, I'm good at making these kind of decisions. I think I might have just gotten lucky. Had a lot of help. You know, Gabby's chief of staff, Pia, Carasone, and Ron Barber, who's here tonight, our district director, and Rod, our campaign manager. You know, I had a lot of people around me. You know, my flight surgeon from NASA was out here. So it's always good to have, you know, people you can bounce things off of, smart people. So I think we got lucky.
And in fact, you in the book talk about demanding a second opinion at one point. You talk a lot about how frustrating and at times dangerous groupthink is, and you relate NASA, and I think you put it. You tell me you put it basically that all the people together were dumber than each one of them was.
So we've had. As many of you know, we've had 2 space shuttle accidents, Challenger in '86, Columbia in 2003, that have killed the entire crew. And part of the reason those accidents happened is because of decision making. And I wanted to make sure that the same poor decision making didn't happen in the context of the decisions we were making for Gabby. So what happened back then is you get this thing called groupthink that'll sometimes happen with groups, where a group of people can make a decision and march off in a direction that no single individual of that group would take. And so we've learned that at NASA over a lot of years through 2 accidents, that you have to do things to make sure that that doesn't happen. You know, one thing you can do is, you know, ask individuals in a meeting, especially the most junior people, you know, what their opinion is. It's always important to ask the junior person, like the little kid in the spacesuit, what his opinion is before you let the manager state their opinion, because a lot of times the junior person would adopt the senior people's opinion. The other thing we talk about, and we have this actually written on the wall of the mission management team conference room, where we make decisions during a space shuttle flight. And it says, in big, bold letters, it says, none of us is as dumb as all of us. So you gotta think about that. And it says the group can be dumber than all the individuals as individuals. And that has caused, I mean, partly responsible, at least for a couple accidents. So in making the first major decision we had to make with regards to one of Gabby's neurosurgeries, I talked to the team, the ophthalmologists, the trauma surgeons, the neurosurgeons, all the residents about that. And I had to tell them, and first they didn't know what I was talking about, but I told them, none of us is as dumb as all of us. And then I explained it to them, and we went around the room. But I would take that approach with her team of doctors, is let's not get all in this group and get all excited about our decision and do something stupid, because we have done that at NASA.
And so you have the presence of mind to bring that knowledge with you to this situation.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have, the background that you have. And yeah, I think I was able to use a little bit of that.
I mean, you were conscious that
Oh, yeah.
the NASA, it was you.
Yeah, even though I was tired, I was, able to bring some of that with me.
So tell the story about the second opinion, which you had. I mean, you had a world-class team here, and yet you demanded a second opinion.
Well, yeah, I mean, early on in her care, many of you guys know Gabby, and she's all about putting a good team together. Her staff here in Tucson, it's an incredible team of individuals, and I knew that later on, when she was able to start asking questions about, how that whole first couple of weeks went, that she would want to know what the team of people that what did you do to help this situation? Who did you get out here? So I knew very early on that, we would, want to get a second opinion. Second, when I was going through this, and we talk about this in the book, when I was going through, prostate cancer, Gabby forced me to get 7 second opinions. So there was no way I was going to let her have multiple brain surgeries without getting second opinions. So, I talk about that in more specifics, but I got her doctors to get us some very good second opinions.
So, page 148. I thought this was really fascinating. We'll call it the Google hit competition. You mentioned in the book that your daughters, Claudia and Claire, from a previous marriage, were reflecting on how 2 people with prominent careers, you both sort of roughly had equal Google hits. And then after the shooting, Gabby, of course, became one of the most famous people in the world. And you write that it hurt to think about Gabby's mushrooming presence.
Did I really say that?
I am in fact quoting directly. So I'll just say I thought that was very brave and revealing of you to admit, but now that you've admitted it, explain.
Well, I recently saw, somewhere that, as far as political figures, in our country, after the president, she was like, the second most talked about person. I told her that recently. She doesn't believe me. She's been lying to her about that. but, we've always, both had two very prominent careers. And, I am more than, I know you guys really love Gabby, but I am her biggest fan out there. So I really love, successful in everything she does. So
Except the Google.
no, that's fine too. I got over that.
Okay, good. So speaking of your daughters, Claudia and Claire, there's also some very, very revealing stuff in the book. That they had I don't know if distant is the right word, but they had a maybe superficial relationship with Gabby before the shooting, and for teenagers and a stepmom, that's not all that unusual. But it's at least understandable. In the book, you describe some painful moments for them since, and I'm wondering how things have changed between the girls and Gabby and grown and how they're doing.
I think it's a good example of how even a really horrible event, a terrible experience, it does have some upsides to it. One of the positive things that have certainly come out from this is, the relationship that Claudia and Claire, my two daughters, have with their stepmom now. Before this happened, it was, distant and a little bit strained. It wasn't like that in the beginning, but as girls become teenagers and they get attitudes, it got a little harder over the years. And, now they actually have very loving, a very good relationship. So it's one of the positive things that have come out of this really horrible experience.
And the girls have dealt with it okay over the months?
They have. It was tough when we were flying out here on January 8th and we found out that Gabby died. That was certainly the low point. And, but since then it's been uphill, and they've dealt with it. I'm very proud.
One of the other stories that a lot of people wanted to know about is how did you and Gabby connect with Bono from U2 and tell the story of the song and whether you.
So Bono and I have something in common. And that's Gabrielle Giffords is in love with both of us. She told me right before we got married, she said, Mark, I've waited such a long time to find the right person, and you're the right guy for me, but I just have to tell you this one thing. There is somebody else. So, kind of put me on notice. After Gabby was shot, and I was getting ready to fly that last flight of Space Shuttle Endeavour, Bono called me, and he wanted me to film this thing on orbit in space at the space station. The beautiful day, words floating, but the more interesting thing was he told me that after Gabby was injured, he felt like he'd met her before. So he had some of his staff go back and look, because he visited Capitol Hill, and he found the picture of the two of them together on Capitol Hill, and he now has that on his desk. And that's the same picture that Gabby has on her desk. I've never met him, but he sends me emails. He checks up on her all the time.
And so you have heard from him since the flight?
Oh yeah. He just wants to make sure she's doing okay and see if she needs anything.
You don't have his picture on your desk. You talk a lot about the dangers of spaceflight, the chances of an accident, and you said you circled the Earth with a really relatively thin skin of metal surrounding you. Despite the safeguards, there isn't much room between you and the void. And that's a courageous thing to do. What have you learned about courage from Gabby?
Well, when Gabby entered Congress for the first time in 2007, I'd flown 39 combat missions over Iraq. At that point, I'd flown 2 flights into space. You know, it was a pretty risky proposition. You know, I've flown 4 now. But at the time in 2007, you know, I didn't realize that, you know, she was the one with the really risky profession. You know, that she was the one that would nearly lose her life serving her country, not me. You know, just to see somebody first fight so hard to survive, and then fight so hard to come back, I'm not sure I could have done that. I mean, she's a really courageous individual. You know, she reminds me every single day to deny the acceptance of failure. You know, she works her butt off every single day. That's a really courageous thing to do, especially early on. You know, when you know, at one moment, you know, you come to the realization that you can't speak and that you're trapped inside your own body. It's a very scary thing.
That was a tough time.
It was tough. It was tough. But we got through it. And it's getting better.
What have you learned about patience?
Well, you know, I've always thought of myself as, I don't know, on some levels I think I'm kind of patient, on others I'm always maybe a little impatient. You know, I'm always trying to do the next thing and keep things moving. But I learned I can be a patient person if I want to be. You know, I certainly, you know, have learned to be incredibly patient every single day. It's, you know, at times it's not easy, but it's something you can learn. So I think I've learned that people can learn to be patient.
I suspect you've learned about compassion before the shooting. What have you learned about it since? I mean, from Gabby, because this is a compassionate
Well, she's an incredibly compassionate person, very empathetic, can, you know, read people's feelings really, really well. You know, I'm not so good at that. I think even, you know, today I'm not. You know, she's still, you know, much better at that than I am. You know, being able to, you know, figure out, you know, how people feel just by being around them, you know, talking to them. So I don't know, you know, that's why in this, you know, in the process of writing this book, I thought it was good to get a guy to help me that wrote a book called The Girls from Ames. And the last lecture, so it was a good person, you know, for me. I think, you know, Jeff, I think, is a pretty compassionate guy.
So you learned something about yourself from writing the book.
Oh yeah. Well, just this whole, you know, this whole process of, you know, dealing with this, you know, this tragedy.
Now, I know you have great appreciation for Gabby's staff, for, you know, Ron Barber, Pam Simon, Gabe Zimmerman, who gave his life. What's touched you the most?
Well, you know, just today I was at Mesa Verde Elementary School, which is the school that Christina Taylor Green went to. And I took their yearbook up in space with me. So all those little kids, you know, I told them today that, you know, they were part of my space flight. They went with me, including their classmate, Christina. You know, I think that's, you know, it's certainly the most tragic thing about this story. You know, Gabby was horribly, you know, injured, but she survived. And just, you know, to reflect on the fact that you have a, you know, nine-year-old girl who would be 10 now that just lost her life because she was, you know, interested in democracy is a really, really tragic thing. It's really hard to explain.
So that's sort of really the opposite of where I was thinking of going next, which is about something that it's about compartmentalization. I'm interested in, as a combat pilot, one has to, you have to stay focused on task. I mean, you absolutely must. And it's just a necessary skill. It's also, it can also be dangerous. Thinking back to President Clinton's notorious ability to compartmentalize things in his personal life, which didn't necessarily serve him well. I'm wondering how that has or hasn't served you over the last 11 months.
Well, it's served me really well in being able to deal with, simultaneously handling, Gabby's care and handling the final months of training for a space flight. And it's not something you're really specifically trained to do in the military, but I think it's a byproduct of, for me, flying airplanes for 10 years in the military, and then 15 years at NASA flying airplanes and spacecraft. And it's something that on all those occasions where you either, in my case, nearly fly into the mountain in the state of Washington, or crash into the bombing range in Korea, which I've almost done once, or flying, almost fly into the logging cable in the Philippines, that you learn to be able to focus and dismiss, everything else that's going on in your private life and in your mind. And so over a long period of time, you have to do that to survive in that kind of environment of flying high performance airplanes off of an aircraft carrier and then flying spacecraft. So, I think, for me, the 25 years of, flying fighters and being a test pilot and an astronaut prepared me very well for this, in my case, this ultimate compartmentalization exercise that I was going to go through in this experience. So I think I was fortunate to have that experience.
Is that, do you attribute that ability? I'm thinking of compartmentalization as something a little different than concentration.
Well, I think it's not only being able to concentrate on one thing, but it's able to, just for moments in time, just completely forget about other stuff and force yourself not to be able to think about it.
Did you have to demonstrate that, do you think, to the folks at NASA in order for you to fly?
There were some, I talked in detail about this. They wanted me to demonstrate it to them. And I went through the motions of demonstrating it to them, but it wasn't necessary. I mean, you don't forget how to fly an airplane you've been flying for 15 years because you haven't flown it in 3 weeks. Ridiculous stuff like that. But, it's an experience, with that amount of experience, there's some things you get good at, and I think that's one of them.
So, another question every single person in here is probably thinking is well, a couple of things. When's Gabby coming back to Tucson?
Well, she was here over Thanksgiving. She'll be back in January.
You know what I mean.
Oh, coming back to go back to work permanently?
No, just to come back to live permanently.
Yeah, so, she, is currently every day going to the same rehab hospital she started in Houston. And, at some point here over the next several months, she'll make the decision on whether she'll run for re-election or not. And, that's going to be made on her own timeline, and she'll make that decision one way or the other. And, I think we'll always have, 2 homes. Right now we spend most of our time in Houston. Eventually we'll probably spend all of our time in Tucson. It's just, it's just hard to tell right now exactly how that's going to progress.
Well, you have to make, the decision must be made by next May, correct?
Yes. Yeah, she'll make a
Fine.
decision whether she's gonna run for re-election or not before May.
Before.
Yes.
Any timeline?
She might have one, but she hasn't shared it with me.
Okay. Is she using, do you think, the possibility of continuing service as a motivation for the rehab?
I think it's a little bit of a motivator. You know, she really cares. I mean, she really took the job of a member of Congress as serious as any other of the 435 people that serve in the House. I mean, she took her job very seriously. And she really wants to get back, you know, to do the job. And, you know, she'll know in the coming months whether she'll be able to do that or not. But I know she wants to. So I think it's a motivator for her. Absolutely.
And we should point out the office is functioning as well. There are things that you cannot do without a member vote, for instance, or
Yes.
introduce legislation. But in terms of constituent calls and such,
Yeah, Gabby, you know, has, you know, I put her team, you know, Ron and Pia and their offices, you know, in DC and here up against any other team of any member of Congress. I mean, they do an incredible job. The job got much harder for them this past year, much harder. And they've really stepped up. And, you know, I don't think anybody could expect anything more out of them. And you're right, she can't vote. She voted on August 1st. But, you know, they're doing a lot of the same work that, you know, they did before she was injured.
and politics aside, it's a very tight office, and even more so because of this tragedy. I'm wondering how you have dealt with the emotion of the last 11 months and sort of the paradox of the tragedy and yet the hope of being here, which you hold in both hands.
Well, I think you just take one day at a time. You know, it's you know, she marches out that door every day and works hard, and it's, you know, it's not only to get better, but it's largely because, you know, it's like you asked, it's, you know, motivation to get back to work. I don't know if there's a paradox though. You know, it's
Well, the sadness and the hope.
of the sadness and the hope. Well, I mean, it's, you know, a lot of members of this community have been impacted by this. A lot of people killed and injured. You know, Gabe Zimmerman on Gabby's staff, you know, that's been really tough for the office. But, you know, that tragedy happened on a Saturday, and that Monday morning, they were open for business. You know, it's because it's what Gabe would have wanted, and it's what Gabby would have wanted. And, you know, I think that shows that, you know, those individuals that work in her office have an incredible amount of hope. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been there that day.
Speaking of which, 1 month and 2 days is the year anniversary, and on the 7th, which I think is a Saturday this year, there are going to be a number of commemorations, celebrations, memorials beyond Tucson, some yet to be announced events with Ron Barber's Fund for Civility and some other things. What are you planning?
So we're looking at the schedule, and we haven't made a decision, you know, which events, you know, Gabby and I will attend yet, but we're having that conversation with her office. We just have to see. I know it's still in kind of in the planning stages, but we're looking at it.
It's still a day by day.
Yeah, it's day by day. We'll figure it out before then.
What's next for you?
I don't know. You know, I know tomorrow I'll be making Gabby dinner. And then on Thursday I'll be making her breakfast. Beyond that, I don't know.
Seriously? You know the rumors that you that have you running for office.
Heard that somewhere. I get asked that a lot. You know, my job is to make sure she can run for office. So I want to make sure Tucson deserves to have, her back represented.
So that's a no for you.
Yeah, I'm from New Jersey.
So you it sounds like you're taking it day by day as well.
I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, I left my job at NASA so I could, have some flexibility, take it day by day, and really focus on Gabby.
I think my watch is correct that we're ready for audience questions, right? I don't see anybody saying yes or no. According to we were going for, it's 8:40, so let's ask a couple. Okay, so here's one. Wondering if you have ever heard from Sarah Palin. In the book, you talk about how it was disturbing that the bullseye that was on for congressional districts, and you, I believe, say she was not responsible, that she is irresponsible, and you was wondering if a call's ever come.
Not yet. I'm waiting though. He knows how to get a hold of me.
Well, if she's out there, she knows how to get a hold of you. Do you eat bananas? You're going to have to explain this, of course. And if you do you still wash them first?
I try to wash them. You guys will have to read our book to figure that out. You want to wash your bananas.
So if you take nothing away from this evening, you want to wash your bananas. You talk about in the book about seeing the destruction of the rainforest from space and how it made you more environmentally conscious. And I'm wondering what you have learned, or just actually Rick is wondering what you learned about our world venturing it out of space.
Well, just from, we fly, the space station's at about 250 miles up. And even from that altitude, which isn't really that high, we go really fast. But the atmosphere is really, really thin. In the context of space, looking down at our globe, and compared to other features on the planet, I mean, the first half of the atmosphere is in like the first 10,000 feet. And after that is the second half. There's not much to it. You can clearly see that from space. So between 2001, which is the first time I flew, and 2011, 10 years later on my fourth flight, you can clearly see the destruction of the rainforest. You wonder where all that carbon goes, and it goes into our atmosphere. And our atmosphere is not, you stand on the planet, you look up, and you think you got this giant, enormous thing called the atmosphere. But from the perspective of where we are, it's really not that big. So you worry a little bit more about it. It looks like it's just a big cosmic wind can come by and just blow it away.
Sounds like everybody would benefit from going into space.
I think so.
All right. In the past decade, this is from Becky, many American families have had soldiers come back from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq with severe brain injuries. What thoughts would you have for them based on your experiences over the last week?
Well, what I talked a little bit about was the vital importance to get people therapy early and for a good period of time to allow them to recover. You want to it takes a long time for nerves. Your brain is mostly made up, these, nerves and these connections, these neurons between parts of your brain. It takes a long time for those to recover. It's important to have rehab during that period that they are recovering. And, I think DOD, tries to do that as well as they can with limited resources. But boy, it's really everybody, you know, including the taxpayer, is very well served by getting those people treatment early and enough treatment. So,
What would you, any advice for caregivers of these people, seeing signs or attitudes?
well, I mean, that's a difficult job, you know, being a caregiver, especially if you're a full-time caregiver, you know, without getting a lot of help from other family members or, you know, nursing staff. It's tough. Most people need help. They need a break. It's a tough experience.
Seen anything that makes you think there's extraterrestrial life?
I haven't seen anything. Well, you know, I often get asked about those, you know, at schools if I've ever seen any aliens, and I sometimes tell those little kids, well, they're very small, they have very sharp teeth, and they live under your bed. But, you know, if you take a piece of the sky that's that big, from like where you're sitting in the front row here, and you take the Hubble Space Telescope, and you zoom in on that, maximum magnification, that little tiny piece of the sky, you know, there are 2,000 galaxies in that piece, each with like 400 million stars in each of 2,000 galaxies. That's what the entire sky looks like. It's hard to imagine that there isn't, you know, life somewhere else in our universe. Really hard to imagine. Now, I don't think that I don't think those aliens with the sharp teeth come and visit us.
So he doesn't have to leave his spacesuit on tonight?
Yes.
All right.
But if he does, I advise him to wear the helmet.
And to go to bed when your parents tell you to. I think that's a great place to call it. All right, Bill?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Shake his hand. You're the